Chapter 23. Concerning a quiet return and the unhurried revelation of affection. Carrie stood for a moment, taking in the familiar yet still novel space of Crispin's cabin. Though she'd been here before, seen his books stacked neatly on the nightstand, noticed the laptop perpetually open to a half-finished manuscript, there was something different about tonight. Perhaps it was the way the moonlight slanted through the balcony door, acting as a key light that isolated the curve of the bed, the polished desk, the worn leather of an antiquarian volume, Austen, she noticed, splayed open on his pillow. Or perhaps it was simply that she was different now, changed by the perfection of the evening they'd shared. Crispin moved beside her, his presence solid and warm. He'd removed his dinner jacket in the corridor, and now it hung loosely from his fingertips. His bow tie was still perfectly knotted, his formal shirt crisp and white against his skin. In the soft lamplight, he looked like a figure from another time, a character from one of his own historical works.
"Would you like a nightcap?"
he asked, his voice quiet in the stillness of the room. She shook her head. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. The public performance of their evening, the witty conversation, the dancing, the literary debate, had served its purpose. Now, in the quiet of his cabin, a different kind of communication could begin. He nodded, understanding without explanation. He hung his jacket carefully over the back of a chair, then turned to face her. His eyes were dark and soft as they traced her figure, still wrapped in emerald satin. Not hungry, not demanding, but appreciative, present. Carrie felt none of the nervous anticipation of their first night together. That had been electric, charged with discovery and risk. This was something else entirely, a quiet settling in her bones, a feeling not of discovery, but of return. She moved toward him, drawn by an invisible current.
"May I?"
he asked, gesturing toward the zip at the back of her dress. She turned, presenting her back to him. His fingers were warm as they found the zip, easing it down. The dress loosened around her, and she felt the cool air of the cabin against her skin. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, not to remove the dress, but simply to touch her, to maintain the connection.
"You were magnificent tonight,"
he murmured. She smiled, though he couldn't see it. "So were you." The dress slipped down, pooling at her feet with the soft, silken sigh of surrendering fabric. She stepped out of it, feeling oddly liberated. All evening she had been in costume. The elegant, confident woman in emerald satin, playing the role of sophisticated intellectual among the literati. Now she was Carrie, stripped of pretense, of performance. She turned to face him. Now it was her turn to deconstruct the formal portrait from the book jacket, to reveal the living man beneath the carefully cultivated image. She reached up and began to work on his bow tie, unraveling the perfect knot he'd tied hours earlier. It came apart in her hands, a black silk ribbon that she placed carefully on the nightstand. Next came the shirt studs, tiny ornate things that required delicate fingers. One by one she freed them from their holes, placing each on the nightstand beside the bow tie. Each stud was a small victory, a deliberate, unhurried unwrapping. His shirt fell open, revealing the chest she'd come to know. She slid her hands beneath the fabric, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart. He stood perfectly still, watching her face as she touched him, his breath catching slightly.
"Carrie,"
he whispered, her name softly spoken as if it were the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask. She looked up at him, and something passed between them that went beyond desire, beyond affection. A recognition, perhaps. A knowing. From somewhere down the corridor, a burst of laughter floated through the door. Other passengers returning late from the evening's festivities, still riding the high of the formal night. The sound, distant yet intrusive, briefly punctured their bubble of intimacy. For a heartbeat, they both froze, reminded of the world that existed beyond this room, of other people with their own stories and journeys. Then Crispin's hands came up to cradle her face, his fingertips firm from years of turning pages. yet impossibly gentle against her skin. She saw him swallow hard, his eyes closing for a moment as if steadying himself. When they opened again, the last trace of a public persona was gone, leaving them startlingly open and full of something more. Affection, love. He bent to kiss her, and unlike their previous kisses, there was no urgency here, no desperate hunger. Just a slow, tender exploration, a continuation of the evening's elegance and romance. They moved together toward the bed, shedding the remaining barriers of clothing with the same unhurried care. When they lay together, skin against skin, the moonlight painted them in contrasts, a study in chiaroscuro, light and shadow defining the planes of his shoulders, the hollow of her throat, the curve where their bodies met. His hand traced the line of her hip, the dip of her waist, cataloguing her by touch. In the dim light, his expression was so open, so undefended that it made her heart catch.
I can't believe you're here.
He said, his voice barely audible. His hand, as it brushed her cheek, betrayed the slightest tremor. She didn't answer with words but leaned in to kiss the hollow of his throat, the line of his jaw, the corner of his mouth. Her body spoke for her, expressing what language couldn't contain. Their lovemaking was different from before. The first time had been a revelation, a desperate breaking of boundaries. This was a conversation, spoken in the language of skin and breath. Each touch was a question, each sigh an answer. They moved together in harmony, finding a rhythm as natural as the ocean outside, as inevitable as the moon's path across the sky. She watched his face in the moonlight, framing it in her mind's eye as if for a portrait. The salt and pepper of his hair caught the light, silvered further by the moon. A thin sheen of sweat made his skin gleam like marble, but warm, alive. There was wonder there, and tenderness, and something else she wasn't ready to name. His eyes held hers as they moved, maintaining the connection that had begun in the chart room days ago, when he'd first truly seen her. Carrie closed her eyes, listening to an internal music. The pleasure built slowly, a single note held and swelling, growing richer until the harmony was almost unbearable. When it finally broke, it was less a shattering crescendo and more a perfect, quiet resolution, a final chord that settled deep in her bones and left her humming with peace. Crispin followed, his breath catching, his arms tightening around her. She held him through it, her hands steady and sure against his back, anchoring him as he'd anchored her. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, her head on his shoulder, his arm curved around hers. His heartbeat slowed gradually beneath her ear, returning to its steady, reassuring rhythm. Outside, the ship moved through the night, a gentle rolling that only enhanced their sense of isolation from the world. Carrie traced idle patterns on his skin, following the contours of muscle and bone. There was no need to fill the silence with chatter or questions. The peace between them was too precious to disturb. A familiar phantom sound intruded on her consciousness, the beep of her mother's medication reminder app, as real in her mind as if her phone were beside the bed. For an instant, her muscles tensed, the habitual response to that summons ingrained over months of caregiving. Then she deliberately relaxed, pushing away the intrusion. Not tonight. Tonight was hers. Crispin must have felt the momentary tension, for he captured her wandering hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss her fingertips. Such a simple gesture, yet it sent a surge of tenderness through her that was almost painful in its intensity. How had this happened? How had this man, who'd irritated her so thoroughly mere days ago, become someone whose touch could unravel her so completely?
What are you thinking?
He asked, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. She considered deflecting, offering something light or clever. But in this moment of perfect vulnerability, only the truth would do. That I've never felt like this before, she admitted. His arm tightened around her.
Neither have I.
It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise. But in some ways, it was more significant than either. An acknowledgement of the uniqueness of what they'd found, the rarity of this connection. A moment of loaded silence followed. His wife, her mother, the ticking clock of the cruise, the unspoken realities pressed in, and Carrie felt a familiar, unwelcome ache tighten in her throat. Then Crispin's hand found hers again, his fingers intertwining with her own, and the spell of the present reasserted itself. The ship's bell sounded, distant and muted, marking the hour. Midnight. 1. Time had become elastic, stretching and contracting according to its own mysterious rules. The moonlight crept across the floor, marking the passage of time in silver stripes. Carrie watched it, feeling the gentle rise and fall of Crispin's chest beneath her cheek. His breathing had deepened, slowed. Without conscious effort, she found her own breath matching his rhythm. Their bodies synchronized even in this most basic function. She should return to her own cabin. She should maintain some semblance of separation, some boundary between them. But the thought of leaving this warm cocoon, this haven they'd created, was unbearable. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with its complications and considerations. Tonight was theirs. Crispin shifted slightly, adjusting their position to draw her closer. Even in his sleep, he seemed unwilling to let her go. She felt a smile curve her lips as her eyes grew heavy. For the first time in what felt like years, Carrie Watson fell asleep without a single worry about what the morning might bring. There was only this moment, this man. The constant, low-level anxiety that had become the background noise of her life as a carer was utterly silent now, replaced by the sound of his breathing, the distant murmur of the sea. She had come on this cruise for 6 days to breathe, a brief escape from responsibility. Now, as the ship rocked gently beneath them, carrying them through the night, two souls breathing in harmony as the moon sailed across the Tasmanian sky, she found herself, at last, truly breathing.